Saint Elizabeth of Portugal was born in 1271 in Zaragoza in the Kingdom of Aragon, the daughter of King Peter III of Aragon and Queen Constance of Sicily. From a very early age, she was raised in an environment of deep religiosity and refined culture. Her name was given in honor of her great-aunt, Saint Elizabeth of Hungary, who was revered for her charity. Elizabeth's childhood was marked by a palatial setting, but also by examples of Christian virtue that would inspire her entire life. From her girlhood, Elizabeth showed great sensitivity toward the poor and suffering. It is said that, while still a child, she saved part of the palace food to distribute to beggars who came to the castle gates. The religious education she received shaped her compassionate character and vigilance against social injustices. This zeal for charity became a constant in her story. Her formation included not only letters and the arts, but also solid instruction in Christian doctrine. Elizabeth learned early the importance of prayer and cultivated a very intense interior life. It was common for her to withdraw in prayer in the chapel, where she spent long periods meditating on the Gospels. This piety, however, did not distance her from the political reality of the kingdom. While still young, she was chosen to marry King Denis of Portugal, also known as the Farmer, for his concern in developing agriculture. The marriage was a strategic union that strengthened ties among the Iberian kingdoms, but it would also be the stage for many personal challenges. Elizabeth was only 12 years old when she was promised in matrimony, something common among royal houses of the time. Elizabeth's arrival in Portugal was accompanied by sumptuous celebrations. The Portuguese court saw in that union a hope for stability and prosperity. Despite the pomp of the wedding, Elizabeth maintained her humility and continued to practice charity discreetly. Soon, her presence would be perceived as a softening influence at court. King Denis was an energetic monarch dedicated to governing the realm. However, he was reputed to be a severe man, and at certain times his relationship with Elizabeth was marked by difficulties. Denis kept concubines and illegitimate children, something that deeply wounded the Queen's Christian sensibilities. Even so, Elizabeth remained steadfast in marital fidelity and constant prayer for her husband. Despite the suffering caused by her husband's infidelities, Elizabeth did not allow resentment to harden her heart. On the contrary, she generously welcomed Denis's illegitimate children, ensuring them care and Christian education. This attitude touched many hearts and prompted admiration even among her opponents. During the early years of marriage, Elizabeth won the love of the Portuguese people with her zeal for the poor. She founded hospitals, distributed alms, and created hostels to shelter pilgrims and the needy. Her example contrasted with the luxury and harshness of many nobles of her time. Thus, she became a beacon of kindness amid the contradictions of the court. A striking trait of Elizabeth was her discretion. She practiced charity silently, often hiding food and resources so as not to humiliate those receiving aid. It is told that when surprised by the king carrying bread in her lap, the provisions miraculously turned into roses. This prodigy became known as the Miracle of the Roses. Although she lived surrounded by privileges, Elizabeth maintained a rigorous spiritual discipline. She fasted frequently, attended daily mass, and recited long prayers for the kingdom. Her life of prayer was nourished by a filial trust in God, which strengthened her in moments of trial. Elizabeth had two children, Afonso, who would later become King of Portugal, and the Princess Constance, who would become Queen of Castile upon marrying Ferdinand IV. The education of her children was a priority for Elizabeth, who wished to instill in them love for God and justice. Despite family tensions, she strove to maintain unity and peace. The reign of Denis was marked by economic advances and the consolidation of royal power. Elizabeth closely followed political affairs, but always positioned herself as a peaceful mediator. Her voice carried weight in times of crisis, for all recognized in her an indisputable moral authority. The palatial environment, however, was not always harmonious. Intrigues and power disputes circulated through the corridors of the court. With her meekness, Elizabeth intervened to contain conflicts, protecting innocents and advising the king to act with clemency. This stance earned her respect even from declared enemies. The Queen also dedicated herself to building churches and monasteries. Her devotion to Our Lady inspired her to erect chapels in honor of the Mother of God. One of her best-known legacies was the monastery of Santa Clara a Vella in Coimbra, which would become a symbol of her piety and generosity. During the early years of her reign, Elizabeth established the habit of visiting the sick and imprisoned. These visits provoked astonishment in the society of the time, for it was uncommon for a queen to expose herself to such humble situations. Yet she saw Christ present in the poor and prisoners. Her relationship with the clergy was marked by great respect. Elizabeth sought constant spiritual guidance and maintained correspondence with religious across different regions. The Franciscans exercised special influence on her, inspiring her love of poverty and simplicity. Religious feasts were moments of intense prayer and sharing. Elizabeth made a point of organizing processions and distributing food to the neediest on such occasions. Her faith was not merely interior, but manifested publicly in concrete acts of mercy. Despite her duties as queen, Elizabeth cultivated moments of recollection. She often spent hours in the palace chapel, interceding for her husband, her subjects, and the church. These silent prayers would become one of the most discreet yet decisive forces of her reign. Many noble women found in Elizabeth an example of Christian life. She guided young ladies to cultivate virtue and avoid excessive vanities. Her maternal counsel bore fruit that spread throughout Portuguese society. Elizabeth's reputation for holiness grew as the years passed. The people saw her as a protector of the weak and a powerful intercessor before God. Even among skeptical courtiers, her witness of faith elicited admiration. Her relationship with her son Afonso became tense at certain times, especially when he rebelled against his father. Elizabeth suffered deeply from this family division, yet she never lost hope of reconciling the two. The Queen sought every possible occasion to bring father and son closer. With patience, she wrote letters and promoted meetings. Her goal was to restore the harmony that political ambitions had broken. This tireless effort would mark one of the most beautiful pages of her story. Over the years, Elizabeth developed a reputation as a peacemaker. She was often called upon to intervene in conflicts, not only within the royal family, but also among rival nobles. Her voice rose as a symbol of peace. The marriage with Denis, though full of trials, was also a space of spiritual learning for Elizabeth. She saw difficulties as opportunities for a closer union with Christ. The cross of suffering became for her a path of sanctification. By the end of this initial phase, Elizabeth was already known in Portugal and beyond for her discreet and effective holiness. Her story was only beginning to reveal the splendor of her faith. In the next part, we will see how she acted as mediator and model of patience during family and political conflicts. The years following her children's birth brought even greater challenges for Saint Elizabeth. Her son Afonso, ambitious and resolute, began to question his father, King Denis's political decisions. The tension between them intensified to the point of generating armed conflicts and threatening the unity of the kingdom. Elizabeth, with a mother's heart, found herself in the midst of a storm that seemed impossible to calm. Afonso's rebellion was born not only of youthful pride, but also of legitimate fears about his position as heir. Denis, on the other hand, suspected his son wished to hasten the succession to the throne. Communication between them grew ever more difficult. Elizabeth realized that if she did not intervene, blood could be shed between father and son. The Queen spared no effort to seek reconciliation. Using her moral authority, she sought mediators to carry messages of peace. Humbly, she also personally visited battle camps to try to prevent clashes. These actions, full of courage and tenderness, became famous in Portuguese history. One of the most striking episodes occurred when Denis and Afonso had already gathered armies ready for combat. Elizabeth mounted her horse and positioned herself between the two enemy camps, pleading for peace in Christ's name. Her gesture impressed soldiers on both sides. Many laid down their arms out of respect for the woman risking her life for reconciliation. Thanks to her intervention, a temporary truce was established. Elizabeth, however, was not content with apparent peace. She continued promoting dialogues and exhorting both to forgive accumulated grievances. This unbreakable stance eventually bore lasting fruit. Although the relationship between father and son never became entirely free of rivalry, the Queen prevented it from turning into a bloody civil war. Many historians affirm that Portugal's unity was preserved mainly by her courage and persevering prayer. While reconciling her family, Elizabeth did not neglect her spiritual life. She continued to visit the hospital she had founded and personally attend to the sick. It is said that she once cared for a leper with such dedication that many marveled at her humility. To her, serving the poor was serving Christ himself. Her fame as a peacemaker reached neighboring kingdoms. Rulers of Spain and even Roman prelates sought her intercession to resolve disputes. In an era of constant wars, Elizabeth became a living symbol that peace is possible when prayer and action are united. Despite the delicacy with which she treated everyone, Elizabeth could also be firm regarding principles. She never remained silent in the face of injustices. Several times she questioned excessive taxes or disproportionate punishments imposed by the king. Her voice rose as the conscience of power. The Queen's social sensitivity was reflected in her works. She created various charitable institutions, such as shelters for abandoned women, nurseries, and leper houses. This network of mercy was innovative in the Iberian Peninsula and inspired other queens to follow her example. Even amid the distrust of some nobles, Elizabeth never abandoned her mission to support the neediest. Her unshakable faith was perceived by all who approached her. Those who once saw her only as a fragile figure came to respect her inner strength. Over the years, Elizabeth faced new political crises. Disputes with Castile and Aragon threatened the peace she had secured with such effort. Once again, the Queen acted as mediator. Through diplomatic journeys and agreements, she eased tensions and avoided prolonged conflicts. In periods of calm, Elizabeth strengthened her spiritual life. She participated in long vigils in the palace chapel and encouraged penitential processions. She saw collective prayer as a powerful way to unite the people and implore divine protection over the kingdom. Many chroniclers report that Elizabeth never allowed herself to be corrupted by power. Though a queen, she lived simply. Her quarters were modest and her diet frugal. She refused the court's excesses, allocating resources to support the poor. The Portuguese people developed deep affection for her. In Lisbon, Coimbra, and other cities, processions in her honor were common even during her lifetime. The Queen always responded to these demonstrations of affection with humility and gratitude. The last years of Denis's reign were marked by the monarch's physical decline. Elizabeth was always at her husband's side, caring for his health patiently. Even after so many hurts, she never ceased to love and respect her spouse. Realizing the king was approaching death, Elizabeth intensified her prayers. She wanted Denis to depart reconciled with God. She arranged meetings with priests and accompanied him in confessions and sacraments. This spiritual care was her last great demonstration of conjugal love. In January 1325, King Denis passed away. Elizabeth wept for her husband's death, but found consolation in faith. She knew she had fulfilled her mission as wife, mother, and queen. Serenely, she prepared to live a new stage of her life. After her husband's death, Elizabeth withdrew from court. She chose to live near the monastery of Santa Clara, which she had helped found. Although she no longer had governmental duties, she continued to exert moral influence over the kingdom. Her widowhood was marked by intense prayer and even more dedicated charity. She divested herself of many possessions and began wearing simple habits. This decision surprised nobles who expected a more ceremonial posture. Despite her voluntary seclusion, Elizabeth did not distance herself from the kingdom's problems. Whenever a dispute arose, she was called to intervene with prudence and sweetness. The saint's voice became a bridge of understanding among rival factions. During this period, she intensified her care for the sick. She made a point of personally visiting patients and providing medicine and food. To many, Elizabeth was an angel sent by God to relieve human suffering. It is said that even in old age, she did not hesitate to travel long distances on horseback to respond to calls for peace. Her maternal heart knew no bounds. This spirit of service consolidated her fame for holiness. Reports of miracles also began to spread. Many claimed to have received healings and graces through her intercession. Although Elizabeth always attributed everything to divine mercy, her spiritual prestige grew visibly. This phase of her life reveals a woman who, even without a crown, continued to reign in the hearts of the people. In the next part, we will see how her death occurred and how her legacy was perpetuated in the history of the Church and Portugal. The final years of Saint Elizabeth of Portugal were marked by an ever greater surrender to God. She no longer considered herself a queen in the earthly sense, but a humble servant of Christ. Although she continued to exercise moral influence over nobles and rulers, her heart was almost entirely directed toward the spiritual life. At the monastery of Santa Clara in Coimbra, Elizabeth found a refuge of peace and prayer. There, she participated in community life while maintaining some reserve to respect the nuns' enclosure. Her example of withdrawal edified all who encountered her. Her presence seemed to illuminate the environment with serenity. Even at an advanced age, Elizabeth preserved the habit of fasting and practicing penance. Her already weakened body struggled to endure the rigors of spiritual discipline, but she regarded suffering as a form of union with the crucified Christ. For her, renouncing comforts was a joy. During this time, various crises emerged among neighboring kingdoms. Castile, Aragon, and Portugal were embroiled in dynastic and territorial disputes. Elizabeth, who had already mediated so many conflicts, felt God calling her once more to act for peace. In 1336, a serious conflict arose between her son, Afonso IV, now King of Portugal, and the King of Castile. The danger of war was real and imminent. Although ill and debilitated, Elizabeth decided to travel to Estremoz, where armies were gathering, with the goal of reconciling the sovereigns. The journey was arduous. The heat and long distance severely affected her health, yet Elizabeth was convinced she could not refuse this final service to her homeland and to the Lord. This was her last mission, to be an instrument of peace among brotherly peoples. When she arrived in Estremoz, Elizabeth was received with respect by soldiers and nobles. All recognized her prestige and sanctity. Although she could barely remain standing, she requested an audience with both kings to attempt reconciliation. Her witness of humility and sacrifice deeply moved hearts. Many wondered how an elderly and sick woman could possess such moral strength. Her example produced the desired effect. Negotiations progressed and war was averted. After fulfilling this mission, Elizabeth felt her life drawing to a close. She herself told those around her that her body would not endure much longer. Even so, she remained serene and confident in God's mercy. There was no fear in her gaze. While resting in Estremoz, she asked to receive the sacraments. She received Holy Communion with devotion and tears in her eyes. She thanked God for all she had lived and for the gift of being able to serve until the last moment. At dawn on July 4, 1336, Saint Elizabeth of Portugal surrendered her soul to the Creator. Her death was peaceful, surrounded by people who loved and admired her. A solemn silence filled the room, as if all sensed that a great saint was passing into eternity. News of her passing quickly spread. Throughout the kingdom, bells tolled and masses were celebrated for the repose of her soul. The people mourned not only the loss of a queen, but of a mother who had always watched over her children. Her body was transferred to Coimbra, where it would be buried in the monastery of Santa Clara. The funeral journey became an impressive manifestation of faith and popular gratitude. Crowds knelt as the cortege passed, asking for her intercession. Upon reaching the monastery, her body was exposed for veneration. Many reported graces and healings attributed to her intercession. Even after death, Elizabeth continued her apostolate of love and mercy. Her burial was simple according to her wishes. She desired no excessive honors, only rest alongside the poor Clares she so loved. Even so, popular devotion continued to grow, and her tomb became a destination for pilgrims. Soon afterward, reports of miracles began circulating. Sick people claimed to have been healed after praying at her tomb. Families in conflict recounted unexpected reconciliations, as if Elizabeth was still working miracles of peace. Her reputation for sanctity was recognized by numerous prelates and religious. Chronicles of the time record her heroically virtuous witness, especially her zeal for the poor and promotion of peace. This memory would remain alive through the centuries. The canonization process began officially sometime later, spurred by persistent popular devotion. Witnesses were heard, documents gathered, and miracles rigorously studied. Everything confirmed what the people already intuited. Elizabeth was a saint. In 1625, Pope Urban VIII officially proclaimed her canonization. In the bull declaring her sanctity, her heroic virtues and extraordinary ability to reconcile enemies were highlighted. Since then, she has been venerated throughout the Church as Saint Elizabeth of Portugal. The memory of her life continued to inspire kings, queens, and ordinary believers. Her figure has been remembered in sermons, paintings, sculptures, and even literary works. In Portugal, she became one of the greatest symbols of Christian royalty, marked by humility and service. In Catholic spirituality, Saint Elizabeth became an intercessor for families in crisis, for people suffering injustices, and for those who work for peace. Her story shows that holiness can flourish even in the heart of power. Many scholars affirm that her life represents the perfect harmony between contemplation and action. Elizabeth knew how to pray like a nun, yet act like a queen. This synthesis is a timely and necessary lesson. To this day, her tomb remains a place of pilgrimage. The faithful who pray there feel a special peace, as if the saint still welcomed and consoled everyone who seeks her with confidence. The liturgical feast of Saint Elizabeth of Portugal is celebrated on July 4th. On that date, churches and communities recall her luminous life and ask for her intercession. It is a day of hope for those who believe in the power of forgiveness and reconciliation. In the next part, we will delve into the impact of her legacy on Portugal's history, popular devotion, and the example her life offers Christians of every era. The spiritual and historical legacy of Saint Elizabeth of Portugal surpasses the limits of her time. Even centuries after her death, her example continues to inspire believers and leaders. She was not merely an admired queen, but a saint whose life is an eloquent testimony of charity and peace. In Portugal's history, Elizabeth represents the ideal of a Christian monarch who united power and humility. Unlike many rulers seduced by prestige, she always kept her eyes fixed on Christ. This fidelity was the source of her inner strength. Her role as mediator in family and political conflicts made her a reference for those seeking reconciliation. The episode in which she stood between father and son's armies became a symbol of peaceful courage. Even today, that gesture is remembered as one of the noblest moments in Portuguese history. Popular devotion consolidated not only in Portugal, but also in Spain and other European regions. Churches were dedicated in her name, and many communities chose her as patroness. Her intercession came to be invoked, especially in situations of discord and illness. In Christian iconography, Saint Elizabeth is often depicted with a crown and roses in her lap. This image recalls the famous miracle of the roses, in which bread destined for the poor was transformed into flowers. The scene became a metaphor for silent generosity. Her tomb, in the monastery of Santa Clara a Vela, became one of the main pilgrimage sites in Portugal. Many report receiving special graces after praying near her remains. This constant flow of devotees is proof that her memory remains alive. Throughout history, various queens have been inspired by Elizabeth to live with greater simplicity and Christian spirit. Her example influenced generations of women in power, showing that holiness is not reserved only for monasteries. Elizabeth also left a profound mark on Franciscan spirituality. Her love for the poor and her life of prayer resonated with St. Francis of Assisi's ideal. Thus, her figure is often associated with the Franciscan family and the spirit of evangelical poverty. The liturgical feast of Saint Elizabeth of Portugal, celebrated on July 4th, is an occasion of great joy and faith. On that day, many faithful renew their commitment to charity and forgiveness. Many parishes organize processions and moments of adoration in her memory. In Portuguese literature, her life has been the theme of poems, historical novels, and chronicles. Writers extolled her heroic virtue and the tenderness with which she treated every person. Over the centuries, her figure became a symbol of what is most noble in Portuguese identity. In sacred art as well, her image has been immortalized in paintings, stained glass, and sculptures. Many of these works can be admired in old churches and museums. Each representation reveals something of the delicacy and spiritual strength that characterized her. In contemporary times, Saint Elizabeth continues to be invoked as an intercessor for families in crisis. In a world marked by divisions and rancor, her witness reminds us that reconciliation is possible even when all seems lost. Her example of persevering prayer inspires Christians who wish to unite contemplation and action. Elizabeth demonstrated that one can serve the poor and afflicted without neglecting intimacy with God. This harmony is both a challenge and an invitation for all. In many dioceses, her story is told in catechesis to show children that holiness is built in everyday life. Small acts of love, such as sharing bread or forgiving an offense, can transform hearts. Saint Elizabeth is also remembered as a model of conjugal fidelity. Even in the face of her husband's betrayals, she remained steadfast in charity and prayer. This heroic stance shows that true love goes beyond feeling and is founded on the decision to love to the end. Over the centuries, the Church has recognized the relevance of her message. Many popes have referred to her example in homilies and writings. Her name appears among the great saints who marked the history of European Christianity. Her spiritual testament can be summarized in absolute trust in divine providence. Elizabeth believed that nothing happened without God's permission and that every trial could be an opportunity for growth in faith. In times of pandemic and economic crises, her life gains renewed relevance. Just as she cared for the sick and fed the hungry, today the Church is called to witness the same compassion and generosity. Her legacy also sheds light on the role of women in the Church and society. Elizabeth proved that feminine delicacy can transform unjust structures and open paths of peace. This lesson continues to inspire women around the world. In many Portuguese families, the story of Saint Elizabeth is passed down from generation to generation. Grandmothers tell grandchildren about the Queen who shared bread and prayed without ceasing. This family memory keeps her witness alive. Even in the ecumenical field, her figure is respected by Christians of different traditions. Her commitment to forgiveness and charity brings hearts closer and fosters dialogue among the churches. Today, her example remains a beacon for those who govern. Saint Elizabeth teaches that true authority is born of humble service and the constant search for the common good. This message is ever more necessary. Her name also inspires contemporary social works, such as hospitals, schools, and assistance projects. Each institution bearing her name is an extension of her mission to love the poor and reconcile brothers. By recalling her life, we are invited to let Christ transform our hearts. Like her, we can respond to evil with good, to offense with forgiveness, to indifference with love. Thus, her memory becomes living and fruitful. Concluding this narrative, we contemplate Saint Elizabeth of Portugal as a precious gift to the Church and the world. May her witness strengthen us on the path of charity, humility, and peace, and may her intercession accompany us in every battle of life.